Hello everyone, and welcome to my build guide for Xiangling. Xiangling probably has had one of the most consistent, great histories as a character in Genshin. She started off being widely overlooked, but grew in popularity as people realized how good she really was, receiving a ton of attention thanks to the national team in all of its iterations. It's become something of a meme at this point that every new polearm is viable on Xiangling, opening up for many options to play her. Today we're going to go over a couple builds to see why she's become so widely loved and regarded by the community. Starting with her talents, you can already see why she could be used in multiple ways. Her normal attacks are a very fast string of polearm swings and thrusts that get a slight buff from Constellations that we'll go over later. Her charge attack is the usual polearm user one, where it's a spinning thrust that drives her forward a good distance. Her elemental skill throws out her quick partner, Guoba, who spits a pyro AoE in front of him every couple of seconds. He'll turn to face enemies when he can, but his targeting is notoriously inconsistent, so be aware of that. Her burst is her bread and butter and the main reason for her popularity. She spins her polearm around her, engulfing it in pyro. It'll continue to spin around the active character for a couple of seconds, dealing very good damage with each pass. Her first ascension talent increases Guoba's attack range by a good bit, and her second one has Guoba leave behind a pepper when his time ends that increases the attack of any character that picks it up. Her constellations are pretty various on what builds promote and how they work. Her first constellation makes enemies hit by Guoba's fire have reduced pyro resistance for a couple of seconds, which really helps her support and pyro DPS builds. Her second constellation adds an effect to the last of her normal attack sequence that I talked about earlier. It'll make enemies hit by the last hit of her attack sequence take an instance of pyro damage after a couple of seconds. This is extremely niche and honestly has no huge use, but does slightly benefit her build as an on-field pyro DPS. Her third and fifth constellations are 3 points to her elemental burst and skill respectively, and her fourth increases the duration of the pyro native from her burst. This is great for basically all of her builds besides the physical DPS build, but still with that build more damage is always nice. Her last constellation increases the pyro damage of any character within her burst, which is good for the same builds as her first constellation, Pyro Support and DPS. First on our list of builds to go over for her is one of the first builds I ever thought up of her, a physical DPS build. This build takes advantage of her fast normal attacks and the Crescent Pike as she was the only polearm character for a time. Despite being an old build, it is still way more than viable thanks to always being good in the first place and receiving a few more options of team slots and weapons. Any of the 5-star polearms will be a good option besides the Engulfing Lightning. The others all have good stats and passives. For 4 stars, she has a lot of options from the Lithic Spear or Deathmatch if you have them, or the Crouchwell Spears, especially the Crescent Pike, which actually outperforms a lot of the 5-star options because of how fast her normal attacks are and how its passive buffs each hit. For artifacts, you can run with 4-piece Pale Flames because the frequency of Guoba's fire and the cooldown actually match up pretty well. I'd still recommend going for 2-piece Pale Flame and 2-piece Bloodstain for an easier time. You could also run her 2-piece of either of those with 2-piece of any of the attack percents, or even run her with 4-piece Shimenawas since you really shouldn't be needing her burst anyways. As for the pieces, you want to go with the typical DPS build of attack percent Sands, physical damage goblet, and a crit crown for whichever crits that you need more of with your substats and weapon. The next build I'll talk about here is very similar, being the elemental DPS build. You might wonder why I'm putting this in a separate section, and to that I'd say the builds are actually pretty different and warrant separate sections. This is if you want to use Xiangling in conjunction with Chongyun or the C6 Bennett for their normal attack infusions. One of the main differences is that the Crescent Pike is no longer as dominant of an option as the DPS build. It still is a good option, as are the other craftable weapons besides the Dragon Spine Spear. The 5-star options are now the best options, even the Engulfing Lightning now, as you'll most likely want to use her burst for a good amount of damage, either through reactions or through already having boosted pyro damage for the Cryo and Pyro builds respectively. The next change comes in the artifact choice. The first 2-piece set depends on whether she's a Cryo or Pyro DPS. For Cryo, I'd honestly recommend going 4-piece Bruiser Strayer, whereas for Pyro, I'd recommend more so going 2-piece Crimson Witch and 2-piece of any attack percent. For the specific pieces, you want attack percent Sands, a corresponding elemental bonus from your goblet, and a crown with whatever crit stat you need. For the Cryo build, Elemental Mastery wouldn't be a waste thanks to your skill and burst, and neither build would be against having more energy recharge, but I'd say to go for these as substats and not prioritize them over attack and crit stats. The build I'm going to talk about in this section is by far her most popular build, that being using her as what I call a support DPS. This role is called a lot of different things between secondary DPS, off-field DPS, off-field support, but you get the idea. She's off-field, but she's doing damage, and I'm going to tell you how to make sure she's doing lots of it. The first thing you should know about Xiangling as an off-field DPS is that she needs energy. The easiest way to address this is in her weapon choice. The best weapon for this is the 5-star Engulfing Lightning, as it grants her more damage based on the recharge. Aside from that, all the 5-star weapons are decent options. Competing with all those 5-star options though is actually the not so easy but always accessible catch. In fact, the catch can actually outperform most 5-stars besides the Engulfing Lightning, and is about on par with the Staff of Homa. Besides that, the only other weapon of note is the Lithic Spear with 4 refinement and at least 3 stacks from having more leeway characters. For artifact choices, the set I would recommend the most is a 4-piece set of Emblem of Severed Fate. Besides that, having 2-piece Crimson Witch and 2-piece Noblesse is a more than viable option. You can also combine any 2 of the previously mentioned sets with each other or 2-piece of any of the attack percent sets, though I'd still recommend going for the loadouts I mentioned. For the pieces themselves, the timepiece depends heavily on what weapon you're using and what artifact you're using. If it's Engulfing or the Emblem of Severed Fate sets, by far best option is running her with energy recharge sands. Otherwise it depends if you have good enough uptime. If you can, then I'd recommend attack percent sands. Regardless of that, Pyro Damage Goblet and a crown with whatever crit stat you need are always the best options. The same applies here as with the Elemental DPS build. Getting Elemental Mastery through substats is actually good depending on the team. The rest of our builds that I'll go over will be much faster as they're relatively similar to each other in the previous burst DPS build I just went over. The build I'll go over now is for a Pyro Support build. The main difference between this and the previous build is you'll be less focused on Xiangling's personal damage and more focused on keeping her burst up at all times possible and boosting your team's pyro damage as much as possible thanks to the pyro buffs in her Constellations. Most of the options from the previous build are actually the same, however the best options are moved around, so if you're having good uptime on the buffs with pieces from the last build, feel free to stick with them. The first change is the weapon I'd recommend most is actually the Pyro Spear. That way she can keep her burst up with its recharge and help the team keep their bursts up. The other change I would make is to run her with 4-piece Noblesse to boost the team's damage. You could also consider running her with 4-piece Tenacity of the Millwood, but for that you'll have to make sure to use Globa off cooldown every time. With that, you'll still have about 2 seconds downtime on the buff, so do be mindful. For the pieces, the main things you want to make sure of are that you have enough energy recharge for full burst uptime, and enough crit rate to reliably proc the Pyro Spear whenever she's on field. Besides that, make sure to run her with Pyro Damage Goblet and you'll have a good time. The last build I'll talk about is in a very similar vein to the previous build, but rather than being a Pyro buffer, she's in the team to cause reactions, namely the Burgeon reaction. She's actually pretty hard to use on a Burgeon team because she applies so much Pyro that she's most likely going to be causing Vaporize or Burn, taking away your option to create blooms more often. For this, the main stat to consider will be her Elemental Mastery. You won't need to worry too much about burst uptype on this build because of our friend Globa. For this, the best weapon is the Dragon's Beam as it gives the most elemental mastery, followed by the Contain Cross Spear and the Moon Piercer, both giving the same amount at max ranks. Choosing between those two is largely preference and depends more on the team you're running if they'll value more burst uptime or more attack from the Cross Spear and Moon Piercer respectively. On artifacts, you easily want to build her with either 4-piece Gilded Dreams or 2-piece Gilded Dreams and 2-piece Wanderers. For the pieces, you want all 3 of the changeable pieces to be Elemental Mastery. As you can see, there are tons of ways to build and play Xiangling. She may honestly be the most diverse character in the game with her build variety. If you found this guide helpful in any way, please leave a like on the video and subscribe for more. If you have any questions, comments, or recommendations, please leave a comment. I love talking about this game, so I'm likely to reply if it's something I can reply to. I look forward to any feedback, and with that, bye everyone, have a great day.